Welcome to Under Baobab Skies. Long before Europe's Renaissance, a different kind of light glowed on the edge of the Sahara. It flickered not from the fires of war or the gold of empire, but from the turning of countless pages. That light came from a city called Timbuktu. For centuries, it was the intellectual and spiritual pulse of West Africa's golden age. A place where caravans carried salt and gold, but scholars carried time itself. Imagine traveling for weeks across an endless sea of sand. The sun beats down, the silence is vast, and then, on the horizon, something appears. It's not a mirage, it's Timbuktu, rising from the earth at the bend of the mighty Niger River. Travelers arriving through the dunes often fell silent at their first sight of it. The great mud-brick mosques of Jingaba, Sanka, and Sidi Yahya, their minarets pointing to the heavens like fingers of faith. They expected a bustling market, a simple trading post. What they found was a university disguised as a city. At its very heart stood the University of Sanka, a sanctuary of thought. It wasn't a single building with grand halls, but a collection of schools and libraries scattered throughout the city. Here, thousands upon thousands of manuscripts lived and breathed. They held the secrets of the cosmos in detailed astronomical charts, the complexities of human society in volumes of law and philosophy, and the healing arts in medical texts. Love poems written in elegant Arabic and vibrant African languages shared shelf space with advanced mathematics. To walk through the narrow, winding streets of Timbuktu was to feel literacy itself humming in the air. A constant, quiet energy that permeated everything. But this was no sterile ivory tower world, disconnected from the realities of life. Each precious book was born from the desert's profound hardship. Its ink, paper, and the knowledge it contained were brought by the same caravans that risked dehydration, sandstorms, and raiders to cross the vast continent. In Timbuktu, survival and study were two sides of the same coin. Both demanded discipline, patience, and above all, endurance. The city understood that knowledge wasn't a luxury. It was a tool for survival in one of the world's most unforgiving environments. The light of Timbuktu was not powered by magic, but by human hands. Inside the cool, dim libraries, you would see motes of dust dancing in the shafts of sunlight that pierced the earthen walls. And in that light, the steady hand of a calligrapher, moving with practiced grace across a sheet of parchment, transforming ink into ideas. These were the hands that held the light. Among those who gave their lives to words were men and women whose names now drift between history and legend. One of the most famous was Ahmad Baba al-Timbukti, a brilliant scholar and jurist. When foreign invaders conquered the city, they feared his influence so much that they exiled him to Morocco. Even in chains, he wrote defiantly, composing works that preserved Africa's intellectual dignity in elegant, forceful ink. He is said to have owned over 1,600 books, one of the largest private libraries of his time. And his only regret upon his capture was the loss of his collection. Then there are the countless, nameless heroes, the scribes, the librarians, the teachers. There is a story, passed down through generations, of a scholar who, as invaders approached the city gates, didn't flee with gold or grain. Instead, he carefully gathered his library, wrapped the precious manuscripts in cloth, and buried them beneath the floor of his home. He then smoothed the dirt over them and prayed that the sand would remember what humanity might forget. It's because of people like him, who valued a book more than their own safety, that this incredible heritage survived. The manuscripts of Timbuktu survived wars, they survived droughts, and they survived centuries of being forgotten by the outside world. Why? because the people of Timbuktu believed that a word left unguarded was a soul abandoned. They saw knowledge as a sacred trust, a gift from God that had to be protected at all costs. This knowledge was never mere decoration or abstract theory. It was intensely practical. The astronomical charts were not just for stargazers, they were the maps that guided camel riders across the featureless desert at night. The medical texts were not for academic debate. They were used to diagnose illnesses and prepare herbal remedies that saved lives. The volumes of law were not just theoretical, they governed trade, resolved disputes, and created a just and stable society. Children in Timbuktu grew up with this reverence for the written word. They learned that every line they copied was not just homework. It was a seed sown against the darkness of ignorance. They were taught that to preserve a book was to preserve the wisdom of their ancestors, and to ensure a future for their descendants. Imagine a single day in the life of a student in Timbuktu's golden age. Your day would begin before dawn, fetching water from the well as the city slowly awakened. Then you would head to the home of your teacher, sitting on a mat in a shaded courtyard, not just listening, but engaging in rigorous debate. Here, debate was a form of worship, a way to sharpen the mind and get closer to the truth. In the afternoon, you might work as a scribe, carefully transcribing an ancient text, your hand cramping but your focus absolute. And as night fell, you wouldn't rest. You would continue your studies by the flickering light of an oil lamp, the Milky Way arching across the desert sky above, until the final call to prayer echoed through the city. Sleep would finally come with the faint taste of ink on your tongue and the words of the day's lessons echoing in your dreams. Few outsiders could have lasted a single day in that city, not because of the heat or the simple food, but because of the immense weight of silence and focus demanded by a life dedicated to learning. It was a city that ran on a different kind of fuel, not ambition or greed, but the quiet, relentless pursuit of understanding. Centuries passed, the great West African empires rose and fell. Trade routes shifted, and the sands of the Sahara advanced, slowly, relentlessly. Timbuktu, once a crossroads of the world, became isolated. The grand libraries, their treasures no longer sought by foreign scholars, hid behind humble clay walls. Their guardians, the families who had protected them for generations, faded into legend. To the outside world, the story of Timbuktu's intellectual glory became just that, a story, a myth of a lost African Camelot. But the desert remembers. In the 20th century, when modern historians and researchers, guided by old tales and local traditions, began to rediscover these hidden libraries, they were stunned. They found not a few dozen, but tens of thousands, and eventually hundreds of thousands of pages. Here, in these fragile, leather-bound volumes, was the proof. It was African science, African philosophy, and African art, written in African hands. It was the undeniable evidence that the continent had not been waiting in darkness for enlightenment from elsewhere. It had always been thinking, writing, and creating, generating its own light. And even now, the story isn't over. Today, when the wind blows across the ancient rooftops of Timbuktu, locals will tell you that if you listen closely, you can hear a faint, dry rustling. It's not the sound of leaves, because there are few trees. They say it is the sound of pages turning in the wind. The city, in its own quiet way, is still reading, still learning from the desert, line by line. Because Timbuktu was never just a place on a map. It was, and is, a conversation. A conversation between knowledge and survival, between the fleeting nature of time and the patient eternity of the sand. It is a testament to the idea that the most powerful thing in the world is not an army or an empire, but a single, well-guarded idea. In the late 1500s, the sound of hooves thundered across the Sahara. A foreign army, a force from Morocco, was marching on Timbuktu. They were chasing the fading wealth of the once mighty Mali Empire. To these outsiders, Timbuktu was a legendary city of gold, a prize to be plundered. But to its people, it was something far more precious. It was a cathedral of thought, a beacon of knowledge shining brightly in the heart of Africa. As dust storms rose to meet the approaching riders, and the desert sun glinted off their bronze helmets and spears, the city held its breath. The age of kings was ending, and the age of silence was about to begin. The invaders came for gold, but they threatened to destroy a treasure far greater. They brought fire and steel to a city built on ink and paper. The libraries of Timbuktu, which held centuries of scholarship, were in mortal danger. As the first fires began to lick at the edges of the city, a desperate race against time began. In secret courtyards, hidden from the soldiers' view, scholars gathered. Their mission was not to fight with swords, but with quills. They worked frantically, their hands moving with a speed born of urgency, copying precious manuscripts before the invaders could seize and destroy them. Each stroke of the pen was an act of defiance. Each finished verse was a small but profound victory against oblivion. They knew that if the words were lost, the soul of their civilization would be lost with them. So they hid their work, their legacy, in the most ingenious of places. They sealed manuscripts in grain jars, tucked them under floorboards, and lowered them into the dark, cool depths of wells. They entrusted their history to the earth itself, praying the sand and soil would guard their culture's memory. These weren't just scholars. They were the first keepers of silence. A new kind of army was born, one armed not with weapons, but with knowledge and the courage to protect it. Imagine a mother, her face etched with worry and resolve, carefully sealing a scroll in a protective goatskin wrap. She hands it to her young son, who gives her a knowing look before disappearing silently into the labyrinth of narrow alleys. This was not an isolated act. All across the city, families were risking their lives, not for gold or land, but for paper and ink. Calligraphers worked through the long, tense nights, their lamps flickering as they duplicated texts on medicine, astronomy, law, and poetry. When their ink supplies dwindled, it's said they diluted the last drops with their own tears. Determined to finish their sacred task, the network of preservation was vast and intricate. Traders, who had for centuries crossed the Sahara with caravans of salt and gold, now smuggled a new, more valuable cargo. They hid books and scrolls among their bundles of salt, their donkeys carrying not just commercial goods, but the intellectual heritage of a continent. One elder, whose name is lost to time, but whose words echo through the ages, wrote a sentiment that became Taman the creed. If they take our gold, they steal once. If they take our words, they steal forever. This wasn't just about saving books. It was about saving the future. It was about ensuring that the voices of their ancestors would not be silenced by the swords of conquerors. They were building a library of whispers, a collection that would outlast the noise of war. For centuries afterward, this silent, sacred duty continued. The manuscripts were passed from hand to hand, from one generation to the next. Fathers entrusted them to sons, and mothers to daughters. These guardians of knowledge kept their secrets while empires rose and fell around them. Regimes changed, borders were redrawn, and new powers came and went. The desert, which is so often seen as a place of emptiness, became a vault. It swallowed armies and buried conquerors, but it returned the words miraculously intact. The fragile pages, protected by dedicated families, survived the harshness of the climate and the turmoil of history. They were hidden in chests, in the walls of mosques, and in remote desert oases, waiting for a time when they could be read freely again. Centuries later, a new foreign power arrived. The French colonized Mali in the late 19th century. They came with their own ideas of civilization and history, assuming they were bringing enlightenment to a dark continent. They were utterly astonished by what they found. Buried in the sand and hidden in the homes of Timbuktu, they discovered not a void, but an ocean of African scholarship. Here were manuscripts that were older than many of Europe's most famous universities. They found sophisticated mathematical treatises, epic poems, and complex philosophical debates written by African scholars hundreds of years earlier. The ink of Timbuktu's scribes had indeed outlived the kings who had sought to destroy it. The quiet act of writing had proven more enduring than the loud clash of steel. The words had won. And what of these manuscripts today? What survives? The story doesn't end in a dusty archive. In modern Mali, in the cities of Bamako and Timbuktu, a new chapter in this epic of preservation is being written. The rhythm is the same, but the tools are new. Young archivists, the descendants of those original keepers of silence, are now using digital scanners and conservation technology to preserve these ancient pages. It's a race against a different kind of enemy now. Not an invading army, but time itself. The desert climate, which once protected the manuscripts, now threatens to turn them to dust. So, restoration teams work diligently, carefully cleaning, scanning, and translating, breathing new life into these fragile documents. They are digitizing the words, ensuring they can be shared with the entire world. As they work, they uncover the full, breathtaking scope of this intellectual treasure. They find more than just religious texts. They find poems about love and loss that are as moving today as when they were first written. They find fiery legal debates about justice and governance. They find incredibly detailed guides to astronomy, charting the movements of the stars with stunning accuracy. They even find profound reflections on human rights and dignity, written long before the phrase became common in the West. Each page they restore whispers the same timeless truth. Empires are fleeting. Power is temporary. Buildings crumble. But ink, when cherished and protected, can endure. The written word holds a power that outlasts any throne. And so, the desert continues to keep its ancient promise. The knowledge of Timbuktu did not die. It survived because generations of ordinary people believed in the power of words. They believed that a culture's true wealth is not in its gold, but in its stories, its ideas, and its wisdom. This incredible legacy continues to live on, not just as a historical artifact, but as a living, breathing source of inspiration. It survives because, after centuries of being hidden in silence, someone is once again reading the words aloud. The whispers of the past are becoming the conversation of the future. In the heart of the Sahel, where golden dunes meet an endless sky, stands the ancient city of Timbuktu. And on the rooftop of its great Sanka mosque, a story was written not in ink, but in starlight. Every night, long after the last call to prayer had faded into the desert silence, a man named Mahmoud ben Youssef would climb to this sacred perch. In his hands he carried a brass astrolabe, its surface gleaming under the moon. He wasn't just an astronomer. He was a believer. For Mahmoud, studying the heavens was a profound act of worship, a conversation with the divine. Below him, the desert city of Timbuktu slept, a labyrinth of mud brick homes and silent courtyards. But above, the universe turned like a patient cosmic drum. He wasn't just stargazing. He was charting the intricate dance of constellations, predicting the celestial drama of eclipses, and calculating the precise timing of Ramadan by the delicate angle of the crescent moon. In his world, there was no division between science and spirit. They were inseparable twins, both demanding humility and awe before the infinite canvas of creation. Timbuktu was more than just a legendary hub for salt and gold. It was an intellectual supernova. Its fabled libraries, like the one at Sankar, overflowed with knowledge. They held not only priceless Islamic manuscripts, but also a universe of scientific works. Translations of Greek astronomical texts from Ptolemy and Euclid sat beside commentaries from scholars in Egypt, and original observations made right there. Under the clear, vast African skies, Mahmud was a guardian of this legacy. He spent his days and nights meticulously copying these precious texts by hand. He wasn't just a scribe, he was an interpreter. In the margins of complex diagrams, he would add his own annotations, using poetic desert metaphors to explain the movements of planets and stars. He saw the universe in the patterns of the sand, and the sand in the patterns of the universe. To his eager students, who gathered around him in the cool shade of the library's courtyard, he would say, "To know the stars is to know life itself. It tells us when to sow our crops, when to embark on a safe journey across the sands, and when to turn our hearts in prayer. The sky," he would emphasize, his eyes reflecting the heavens, "is the book that God has left open for all of us to read." He taught them to see the universe not as a distant abstract concept, but as a practical guide and a spiritual compass. Imagine his hands, weathered by the sun, carefully turning the rings of his as he adjusts the delicate pointers. Golden constellations seem to bloom across the screen of the mind. Orion, the hunter. Scorpius, the scorpion, not just as myths, but as celestial signposts, drawn with the precision of a master cartographer. These were the tools that connected the earthly realm with the cosmic one. But even in this golden age of knowledge, the winds of change were beginning to blow. The political landscape of the Songhai Empire grew turbulent. Beloved patrons who funded the libraries and supported scholars passed away. Rulers, once united, became entangled in quarrels and power struggles. The vital trade routes that were the lifeblood of Timbuktu began to shift, like rivers changing course, leaving the city more isolated. As a result, the funds for scholarship, for the precious ink and parchment, began to dry up like a seasonal oasis. The once thriving intellectual community faced a crisis. Many scholars left, seeking patronage elsewhere. The libraries grew quieter, the vibrant debates fading into memory. Yet Mahmud ben Yusuf persisted. His faith in knowledge was as unshakable as the great mosque itself. When the expensive ink from the East ran out, he didn't despair. He improvised, mixing fine soot from cooking fires with goat's milk to create his own. When parchment became a luxury he could no longer afford, he found other ways, writing on softened leather hides. Their surfaces imperfect but still capable of holding a universe of calculations. For him, this wasn't just about preserving information. Each calculation he made, each celestial diagram he drew with his homemade ink, was a prayer. It was an offering, an act of devotion, against the encroaching shadows of uncertainty. He was a lone sentinel, keeping the light of knowledge burning against the dimming horizon. He understood that empires rise and fall, but the stars remain constant. His work was a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit to seek, to understand, and to wonder, even in the most challenging of times. After a long life dedicated to the sky, Mahmud ben Yusuf was laid to rest in the sandy earth near the mosque he had loved so deeply. He had spent countless nights on its roof, and it was only fitting that he be buried within its shadow. His students, now masters in their own right, carried his legacy. As they buried him at dawn, with the first light stretching across the desert, they placed his trusted brass astrolabe beside him. Its surface was worn smooth, a testament to a lifetime of use. Its edges softened by the touch of his hands through countless nights of observation. The winds of the Sahara blew over his grave, shifting the sands year after year, century after century. Timbuktu's golden age waned, and its stories became whispers, myths of a lost city of gold and books. The world largely forgot about the astronomers who had once mapped the heavens from its rooftops. Then, generations later, a young child, playing in the sand near the old mosque, unearthed a curious piece of metal. It was a fragment of brass, its markings still surprisingly sharp and clear, despite the centuries. It was a piece of Mahmud's astrolabe. Historians and archaeologists, piecing together the puzzle of Timbuktu's past, traced this fragment back to its owner, the forgotten astronomer who had so diligently mapped the desert's sky. And just like that, Mahmud's story was reborn. It lived on, a powerful reminder that Timbuktu's brilliance was not only written on fragile pages that could turn to dust, but was also etched in starlight, a legacy that could never be completely erased. His knowledge wasn't buried with him. It had been cast into the world. Even today, that knowledge endures in ways we might not expect. When nomadic Tuareg caravans navigate the vast, featureless expanse of the Sahara at night, they look up. They find their way by the belt of Orion or the bright stars of the Southern Cross. Without ever knowing his name, they are echoing the lessons of Mahmud ben Yusuf. His wisdom has become part of the living culture of the desert. As night falls over Timbuktu now, the city sleeps. But its ancient gaze, the collective spirit of scholars like Mahmud, remains fixed upward, steady, wondering, and eternal. They knew that to understand our place on Earth, we must first understand our place in the cosmos. You are under baobab skies. This has been just a small glimpse into the incredible history of Timbuktu. To uncover the full story of its astronomical wonders, its legendary libraries, and the scholars who changed our understanding of the world, be sure to watch our complete 2-hour documentary. You won't want to miss it. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories from under the baobab.